Well, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to talk about what we're doing here at Dalhousie and at the Brain Repair Center. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, great. Will you raise your hand if I get too quiet to let me know? Let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So, can you, I think that's a little out of focus. Does that look okay to everyone? Yeah. There, that's better. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit in general terms first. I'm going to give you a little bit of context to what we do. So it's a bit of a user's guide to the brain. Then I'm going to get into how changes in the brain are seen in Parkinson's and how that impacts on cognition. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a minute. Then I'm going to tell you about the Cognitive Repair Kit, which is the project that I have going on at the Brain Repair Center, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So I'm here to talk about the 3-pound computer that's in everyone's head. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with your brain. I find that most people know more about their heart and their stomach than they do about the brain that's in their head. But it's only 3 pounds, and it has more computing power than any computer that exists today. If you look inside the brain, you see there are some components that form the sort of working force of the brain. And I don't know if many of you have seen an MRI. Who's seen an MRI before? Okay. So basically what this is a shot of your brain if I were to sort of slice this way, so you're looking straight on it from this angle. And here's the top of the head, and here's the neck. And so you're sort of looking at the face. And I want you to notice 2 things. One, do you see this little line of gray, the gray lining on the top? Oops. On the top of the brain, okay? Those are the brain cells. Look at that, that's a huge brain. And look at how much space is devoted to the brain cells. And you also have a lot of gray in the middle here. And this area is important to Parkinson's, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But so here are all your little cells, and then all of this white area, those are the connections that they make. And that's where all the work happens, is in the connections. And that's how we are approaching the Cognitive Repair Kit in terms of aiming at the connections. And I'll explain that more. There's also a lot of fluid in the brain, and that's to help with the cushioning of the brain in the skull. And it also is a conduit for bringing in nutrients and getting rid of waste from the brain itself. You have a universe inside your brain. There are more cells in your brain than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Think about that. And there are many, many different kinds of cells. They all do different kinds of work. But notice, they all have these tree-like and leaf-like things. In fact, this looks a little bit like Halifax in the winter. And all of this tree-like, what's called arborization, those are where all the connections are made between the cells. And you can see that here is the little cell body, and then this is all the connections that it makes. So the connections are what are really important for how the cell works. And the connections are where it receives input from its neighbors and from things a long way away. And then it sends out, it does its work by this one little line right here. That's called the axon. And that's where all the message is transmitted. So it's got one little electrical wire, basically, where it sends out its information. But this is the calculator. So it gets all of this input, and it does a calculation, and then it decides whether it's going to send a message on down the way. So the computing power of the brain is through the connections, and how the connections get calculated and how they are created and how they give information to each cell and how the cell decides what it's going to do with it. And the connections, I told you had a galaxy of cells. The connections are so numerous that if you were to try to count them, 1 per second, it would take you 32 million years. So it's just incredible to me when I think about how much is packed inside this 3-pound massive jelly, basically, in your head, and how much it can do and achieve through those kinds of structures. So now, if you look at your brain, different parts of your brain do different things. And while today the emphasis is all on networks, how different parts of your brain work together, in general, different parts are responsible for coordinating different functions. And so we have parts of the brain that are important for walking and motor activities, and that's very important from a Parkinson's point of view. We have parts of the brain that are responsible for seeing, for communicating, and language. And then we have the front of the brain here that's responsible for executive function. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a minute. But you can sort of guess by the name. It's like the CEO of a company who is responsible for the top-down setting the goals, trying to coordinate the activities. And that's what the frontal lobes do for you. Now, what happens in Parkinson's disease? So these tiny little cells called the substantia nigra in the brainstem, they use a chemical to communicate with other cells called dopamine. And so when one cell communicates with another cell, what happens is it sends out a little chemical messenger that travels to the next cell, and then that cell picks it up. So one cell with all of that tree-like thing might be getting different chemicals from all different parts of the brain. And then it calculates something and sends on the message. So this area here sends information up to the middle of the brain, an area that's called overall the basal ganglia, and you've probably heard the term striatum and caudate. So this area of the brain starts to degenerate, and then the communications that it makes to that middle part of the brain starts to fade away. And this stops getting the input that it needs. Now, this area here is really, really important for motor behavior, for walking, for using your arms, for any kind of action that you want to do. But it also, let me just show you this. So this is, as you can see here, these are shots of the brain, and here is an MRI again to show you the angle that we're looking at. So now we're looking at the brain through, let me go back. What I've done is I've cut the brain through here, so you can see what happens to this area when it stops getting that chemical. So this is that area in cross-section. And what this is a PET scan. And I don't know if you've heard about PET scans, but they basically can see how much dopamine, they can tell you how much dopamine is in different areas of the brain. And the more red and brighter the area is, the more dopamine there is. So here is a brain from someone who doesn't have Parkinson's, and you can see how very red and ringed with yellow it is. Here is a brain from someone with Parkinson's, and you can see how it seems to have lost a lot of that red, especially on this side, and a little bit as well on that side. Right? So it's losing the dopamine. Now that effect has major, so here is that middle area again, that effect has major consequences for action, for being able to walk. It has action for being able to talk. But it also has downstream actions because that area also talks to the frontal lobes. So I told you that there's we think in networks. So when one area starts not working well, it has downstream effects in a lot of other areas. Okay. What do I mean by cognitive? So by cognitive, I'm talking about mental activities that you might go through every day. Many things that we take for granted. Being able to pay attention, for instance, to me talking to you, being able to remember, being able to make decisions, being able to plan your vacation, being able to go to school and learn, you know, what's the capital of France. Those are all cognitive activities. The degeneration that happens in that middle area of the brain has major impact on these as well, although they're not quite as so widely understood. But we're getting there. So I just wanted to show you that there's now becoming more and more interest in what are the non-physical consequences of those cells degenerating. It's very downstream. It starts out in substantia nigra, it goes up to the middle of the brain, and then that problem travels forward. So we're starting to see now that people are reporting cognitive changes in Parkinson's disease. And for those of you here who have Parkinson's or know people who have Parkinson's, I would imagine that some of these things this is not a surprise to you. Now, there's just been a really interesting recent review of this, and I just want to share with you, not to worry about the details, but just to reinforce the idea that that center area of the brain has 4 roles, has 4 different things that it does. The motor, sensory motor activities we're familiar with. The authors here call this associative activities, and by that he means cognition, learning, those kinds of things. And then they also have roles in the limbic system, and by limbic that means emotional. So things around depression. So this idea that that center part of the brain, imagine, it's just an incredibly integrative spot. You can imagine it's right in the center, so it's getting all of this input coming in, and then it's sending things out. It also gets input back. So it's like sitting in the middle, it's like the way station. So when that degenerates, you get all of these other things happening. Now, the interesting thing about this theory is that it talks about there's 2 basic groups of mental activities that get affected by Parkinson's disease: habits and goal-directed activities. So let me give you an example. How many here have driven home from work or wherever they spend the day, intending to go home, and they arrive at home and realize that they haven't remembered anything along the way? That you just managed to get home, and remembering what you did along the way is sort of a mystery. Right. So you were using your habit system. You were doing things on automatic. You didn't really have to think about it. You were probably off daydreaming about what happened at work, or what you were going to do at home, or how much work you had to do tomorrow, or whatever. So that driving home like that was using your habit system. Okay, now, how many remember learning how to drive? How many remember trying to teach their son how to drive? It's not easy, is it, to learn? I mean, you overcorrect, and you just know how to use the gear shift knob if you're trying to use a standard, and it takes a lot of work to learn how to drive. Well, with time, so that's your goal-directed self. You have a goal. You want to learn to drive, and you have to learn what you need to do, how you use the accelerator pedal and the brake and the steering wheel, and how you don't overcorrect when you turn, and how you park. All of those things are goal-directed activities. But the more you do them, the more automatic they get, and less effort. So eventually you get to the point where you can drive home without thinking about it at all. So most of our mental activities have a combination of this habit and goals. And to the extent that things are very overtrained, they're more habitual. And the advantage of the habits is that they're fast. We don't have to do much to get them going. but they're inflexible. They don't respond well to unpredictable situations. So if someone jumped out in front of you when you're driving home and not paying attention, if you aren't quick enough, you're going to run into them because you don't have a habit for avoiding. The other side of that, the goal-directed side, that's the flexible side because it can respond to changes in the environment, but it's a lot slower. So under stressful situations, we're more likely to turn to the habits because they work fast. But under situations where we're trying to plan something, we're going to use our goal-directed side. Okay. Do you want to try something? Can I show you an example of habits versus goal direction? Okay, so I have a job for you. This is a video. How many have seen the basketball movie? Okay, no helping. Okay, so your job, if you can see this movie, is to pay attention to the folks in the white shirts. That's a team. There's the white team and the black team. The white team is passing the ball to their white team members. So they're playing a game. And what I want you to do is to count how many times the white team gets to pass the ball. So they might bounce the ball to their white team member or they may throw the ball. But your job is to ignore the black team and to count the white team ball passing. You get it? Okay. You just have to click on this to make it go. Okay. Okay, how many passes?
14.
Yeah, 14 or 15 is usually the modal answer. So what were you doing when you were trying to count?
Paying attention.
You were paying attention. You had a goal, right? You had to pay attention to the white team. And you had to follow them as they moved around. Right? So that's all new to you. So you had to use your goal-directed self. What was the habit that you were using?
Watching the white team, the pass of the white team.
Right? So you sort of knew what to expect, right? When people are going to pass. You could predict when they were going to pass. There was another really big habit that you were using. Counting. Counting. Right. You don't have to really think about what comes after 1 or 2 or 3, right? And obviously you're using your habit to know what's white and what's black. That's pretty effortless as well. But trying to follow the white team and ignore the black team, that took a lot of effort, right? Did anyone see anything unusual? A couple of people?
There's more than one ball.
Right, there's more than one ball. So how many saw the gorilla?
Oh, what? The gorilla?
Do you want to click on it again?
No way. There. Yeah.
So you were doing multitasking here, right? You were filtering out the black, you were watching the white, you were counting, you were having to make sure, figure out which ball is going to which individual, right? So this is a really good example of habits, using habits and using goals to do something. And it's pretty effortful. You have to really sort of focus on that. And that's why most of you missed the gorilla. Some of you may be really good at multitasking, and which is why you saw the gorilla, because you can do both things at once. Or maybe you just weren't paying attention and following my instructions. Who knows? And I won't ask. Here's another example of how habits and goals conflict. I want you to just read those words out loud for me.
Red, green, yellow, blue, green, yellow, red.
Pretty easy, huh? That's pretty much a habit by the time you become an adult. We've all learned to read, and it doesn't take a lot of effort, at least particularly for these kinds of words that are very familiar. Okay, now this row, I want you to name the colors of the words. So just the ink that the word is printed in. Yeah. So color recognition is pretty automatic too, right? Okay, now the next group, I want you to do the same thing. I want you to name the color that the word is printed in. So name the color of the ink.
Green, yellow, red, green, yellow, yellow, red, blue, green, yellow,
It's not quite so easy, is it? So this is when reading, which is a really strong habit, conflicts with color naming, right? And this is what happens in Parkinson's, is that the habits and the goals conflict a lot. And it's hard to draw upon the ones that you need at the time that you need them. Okay. We're not gonna do this one, but just to show you, this would be another thing that we would use to test that this is a real goal directed type of activity. And you may actually be familiar with this. It comes in a lot of different forms, where the idea is that you have balls on this side, and your job is to get them over to this side in the same order. And you can only move one ball at a time, and you can't put a lighter ball on top of you can't put a darker ball on top of a lighter ball. So trying to figure out the steps that you would take to go from here to here to get to the same sequence takes a lot of work, because you have to sort of plan, how am I going to do this? You have to remember rules. If something doesn't work, then you have to shift and figure out, well, okay, let me try something different. And this is exactly the kind of thing that people with Parkinson's have trouble with as well. Okay, what can we do about it? So I've talked about some of the problems that there might be. Is there any solution? Now, the best solution would be to cure Parkinson's, right? And someday, hopefully, one of my colleagues who's working on that is going to do that. It's probably going to be a team. In the meantime, we need something to help. And so what we're trying to do is to develop things, activities, exercises that one might be able to use along the way. So is it going to work? Well, there. We know, for instance, that L-DOPA doesn't do very much for the cognitive network. And so they've looked at that a lot. And so when you give dopamine or most of the medications that are used in Parkinson's, it's pretty good at handling the motor symptoms usually, but it doesn't seem to do much for the cognitive symptoms. It also doesn't do much for the depression or other things as well. But there are starting to be a few bits of evidence that suggest that we can actually use neuroplasticity, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute, to help with the cognitive issues. So what is neuroplasticity? That brain that I showed you with all those connections, it's constantly changing. Everything you do has an impact on how the cells are working. And we're starting to know now that we can help rewire connections. So when you have a problem in one area of the brain, we can help rewire things around it. It's a bit like making detours. We also know how to make new cells. And there are lots of ways now that we're starting to learn that you can make new cells. One is to put them in, as in stem cell transplant. But you know what's the easiest thing to do to make new cells? Well, it's not so easy. But it's one thing that we can all do, and that's exercise. Exercise improves the production of cells. Experience or practice, going to the gym, doing exercises, plays a major role in the reconnecting to make something work again. And it's that old use it or lose it kind of thing, where if you don't use a connection, the brain just says, okay, we don't need that one. I'm going to put my energy into one that's getting used. And the things that we know about neuroplasticity now, because we have so many tools that help us look inside the brain so we can actually see the connections happening. We can see the cells being formed. What we know is that whatever you do has to be intense, and it has to be repeated over and over and over again. There is no quick fix. But then nothing we really know, nothing that we do really well, was learned very easily, right? So it shouldn't be a surprise. I have a picture here of Donald Hebb in the corner. We should be very proud. Donald Golding Hebb is a lad from Chester Basin in Nova Scotia. He is probably the most famous neuroscientist that formulated the idea that cells that fire together, that is, when they work together, they link up together. They hook up together. And his idea that experience creates those connections is constantly being used and cited, and he really changed the way people think about the brain. So, and that's our homegrown boy here. I just want to show you, I told you exercise can change the brain. So here is a group of individuals that we're looking at what happens when you do working memory training. And it's a bit like the kind of thing I'm going to tell you about in a minute that we're doing. They did this now this is not with people with Parkinson's, but this is with individuals with, I think these were children. And here is that PET scan again. And this should look familiar to you, right? There's that middle of the brain where that substantia nigra projects to. This shows that this area it got bigger from working memory training. Okay, so it's not just the exercise that's going to help. It's also any kind of mental exercising, physical exercise. It's mental exercising that's going to make a difference too. And in this study, they did it for 20 minutes a day for 5 weeks. Okay, this brings me to our study. We're calling it Skills to Help Attention Recover in Parkinson's, SHARP. We're trying to create sharp brains. And what we're trying to do is look at the effectiveness of training in Parkinson's using a game-like approach. So I said neuroplasticity needs repetitiveness, it needs intensity, you need to do it over and over and over again. So what better way to do it than with a game? Makes it more fun, makes you more interested in doing it. And the other advantage of using a computer and a software-based approach is that we can control how hard it is. We can gradually make it harder as you get better at it. And we can also measure how well you're doing. So we can respond to the problems, or we can respond and make things better. And as was already said, our ultimate goal is to improve daily function and quality of life. So it's a study where we have two groups of people. One group, we are looking at two different kinds of training. One group will get the one type of training we're calling visual spatial training, and then the working memory training. And before and after each set of training, we're going to measure how well they're doing on tests that tell us how well their working memory is, their attention is, etc. And we're going to look at also how long it lasts over a 3-month period. So we'll be able to compare how well the training does against each other and how well it does in relation to how you were before you started. And I brought with me, and I know we're running out of time, but I brought with me a couple of examples of the game itself. Maybe I'll go to this one. Can you click on that? So this is one of the games that we've created. Can you move the hand away from, yeah. maybe you better try clicking again. Okay, here we go. It's starting. So what this one is there are things coming up on the screen, and you have to remember what you just saw, and if it repeats, you press this button here. So you have to hold something in mind in order to decide whether you see it again. And the person who's doing this right now, when you do it right, you get a green light, and when you do it wrong, you get a red light. So that's a very simple working memory task. You see something, you hold it in your mind, and then you have to say whether you see it again. And you can see we give feedback, and we do it in short bursts to give you a break. But that gets faster and faster as you get better. And then if we go on to the next one, here, when you get really good, then we give you 2 windows. Can you click on that? Oops. Okay, here we go. You get 2 windows where 2 things, one will come up here, and one will come up here. And you have to remember what you saw in this window and what you saw in this window. So if it repeats in this window, you press yes. But only repeating things in this window, and then that one's a repeat, so you press yes for that one. Okay. So now you're holding 2 things in mind, and you have to wait for the match. We also have it so that you might be hearing things as well. So you're waiting for matches from the sound, like a letter. You're waiting for matches from the pattern. We have different kinds of stimuli that you might be listening to or watching. And the theme of this is you're trying to find matches to crack a code. And this will give you what you've cracked in the real game. So you're an agent in an agency, and you're getting messages in from the field from the agents, and they're sending you messages in code, and you have to crack it. That's the game part of it. We've done something similar to this in people without Parkinson's to make sure that this works. And this is, so you remember those windows that I showed you? There was 1 and then there was 2. And then there could be 3 or 4. So this is telling you how many windows. You can see these are young undergraduates now, so they ought to be pretty good at it. Most of them probably played computer games. You can see that some of them get up to 3 or 4. Some of them actually don't get too much better. And I think we all have our own level, right? And so we've got some stars and some non-stars. We've tried this now with some patients as well in a different study. And these are individuals who've had a stroke. And ours, we've had 1 star who's gotten up to 6 windows. But you know, it's really just because you're starting slow and you're getting the intensity and the repetition. And she's also very motivated. So we think it's feasible. And now our study is to see if it works. And so right now what we're doing is we've just rolled out the study, and we're looking for people who want to volunteer for it, to be in the study. And I brought some sign-up sheets, and there's some handouts about the study in the back. If you are interested, or if you know of anyone who might be, or you can just maybe tell people that you know about it, and let's get the word out. If you know of groups that might be interested in hearing me give this talk, I'm willing to come and talk to different groups, again, to get the word out, to see if anyone's interested. We've also made the decision, and it was a conscious one. As an academic, we normally, when we do research, we publish in the literature, and it sort of, some people read it, some people don't. It kind of, sometimes it feels like you're publishing in a void. And things just, get out there, but nothing really comes of it. We've made the conscious decision that we're going to use this work. We want it to get out to people, so we're actually commercializing it, so that we can find a business investor who wants to actually work with us and market it and get it out to people who need it. So we also are looking for investors and people who who want to work with us in terms of commercializing and getting it out. I can't do this on my own. In fact, this is my research village. And this is a multidisciplinary project that involves a number of investigators. So these are Dr. Mendez, some of you may know, is a neurosurgeon who works with Parkinson's. Sadly, he's actually on his way to Saskatoon to work there. But we'll be keeping in touch and working with him still. I have a number of trainees who also work with me and staff. And really, I am just privileged to have so much talent under my roof. We're also working with a video game company, the Red Space division of Team Space out in Bedford. They're a great group. They're really fun. And I've just found the whole game, devising a game and the gameplay very rewarding and challenging and very creative. And then I have to acknowledge the Parkinson Society Canada, who's really set us on this path. Without that, we could never have started. And as I said, this is a commercializable product, so we're funded by the ACOA, Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, through the Atlantic Innovation Fund, and as well as other groups who have also provided some of the matching funds for it as well. So it's really been very much of a privilege to work with people that are so dedicated to find the societies that are willing to support our work and support our ideas. And I also find it immensely, it makes me feel very humble that people come and work with us and are willing to be in our studies and give us the trust that we might be doing something good. So thanks for your attention. And if you have any questions or you want to get in touch with me about it later, I'll be here for a little while. Thank you.